Welcome! Check out the safety tips and be sure to subscribe to the channel right here. Thanks for watching.
Hello everyone. I'm Eric, the workplace safety guy. It was a Monday in August. The sun was still beating hard against the parking lot of the metal fabrication plant when Diego walked through the side door of the shop at 6:40 in the morning. 38 years old. Father of 3. 18 years of experience in welding and metal cutting, 8 of them at that same company in rural Texas. He was the kind of professional supervisors called when a job needed to get done fast and get done right. The kind that younger coworkers watched to learn how it's supposed to go. That morning, the request was simple. A structural steel piece needed to be cut and ground down before 8 o'clock to keep the production line from falling behind. Routine work. Diego had done it hundreds of times. Maybe more. He grabbed the 9-inch angle grinder sitting on the workbench. Turned it on. And it was right there, in that automatic motion from a man who had never stopped to think it could be the last one, that Diego's story started moving in a different direction. Because the disc mounted on that tool was not the right disc for that job. It was a cutoff wheel being used for grinding. A technical difference that seems minor on paper. That seems minor right up until the moment it stops being minor. What happened in the seconds that followed was not an accident. It was the sum of everything nobody had ever taught Diego. Of everything the company had left undone. Of everything a federal American standard demands, in plain language, for more than 50 years, and that continues to be ignored in shops, job sites, and factories every single day. Diego survived. But the road back was long. And expensive. For him. For the company. For the family that waited at home without understanding what had gone wrong with a man who had 18 years of experience. What you are about to discover in this script is not textbook theory. It is the reality behind the numbers OSHA publishes every year that almost nobody stops to read. It is the pattern that appears accident after accident, investigation after investigation, repeating the same causes with different names. And it is the answer to a question that very few professionals ask before they switch on any angle grinder. Do you actually know what you're holding? Stay until the end. Because what comes next will permanently change the way you look at that tool sitting on the workbench right now. If you work in a shop, on a job site, in maintenance, or in safety management, share this content. The next Diego may be on shift right now. To understand what happened to Diego, you first need to understand what an angle grinder is and what it is capable of doing when the conditions are wrong. The angle grinder is classified by OSHA as a portable abrasive wheel tool. It operates with discs that spin between 7,000 and 15,000 rotations per minute, depending on the model and size. 15,000 rotations per minute. To put that in visual terms, that is 250 rotations per second. A disc spinning at that speed accumulates enough kinetic energy to, in the event of a rupture, launch fragments at over 100 miles per hour. That is not a metaphor. That is basic physics. And it is exactly why 29 CFR 1910. 215, the primary federal regulation for abrasive wheel machinery in general industry environments, has existed since 1971. More than 50 years of clear requirements covering guards, operating speed, disc inspection, mounting procedures, and personal protective equipment. 50 years. And yet, machine guarding, the category that encompasses grinder-related guard violations, closed fiscal year 2025 as the 10th most cited violation by OSHA, with more than 1,200 formal citations in a single year. More than 1,200 times in a single year, a federal inspector found a company violating exactly the type of standard that could have protected Diego. To understand why that number does not fall, you have to understand the profile of the typical accident. And the typical angle grinder accident does not happen to careless, irresponsible, or inattentive workers. It happens to experienced professionals, on tasks considered simple, on days that look completely normal. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission documented nearly 25,000 angle grinder injuries in a single year in the United States. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, in the United Kingdom, records more than 5,400 grinder injuries annually, establishing it as the third most dangerous tool in industrial environments. Third most dangerous. Not 30th. Third. And among those injuries, there is one category that demands special attention: kickback. The term describes the phenomenon in which the grinder disc suddenly jams in the material, releasing the accumulated kinetic energy instantly and without any control, straight toward the operator. OSHA's data on kickback are the most disturbing of all. 20% of injuries caused by angle grinder kickback result in death. The remaining 80% result in hospitalization. 20% fatality rate. For something that happens in fractions of a second. Diego had heard the word kickback a few times across 18 years of work. Nobody had ever sat down with him to explain the physics of the phenomenon, the scenarios that trigger it, the factors that multiply the probability of it happening. Nobody had ever shown him which federal standard required exactly that level of training. The standard exists. The training had never happened. And that is the gap where the majority of accidents live. OSHA is clear in its requirement. Any worker who operates, mounts, or maintains abrasive wheel tools must be formally trained on that specific equipment, with verifiable documentation that the training occurred and that the worker demonstrated practical competence. Not classroom attendance. Not a signature on a list. Demonstrated competence on the actual equipment, in the actual environment, with the actual risks that specific job presents. Diego's company had a safety program. It had documents. It had records. What it did not have was real competency verification. And that was the time bomb. But what nobody, not even Diego himself, knew that August morning was that the disc mounted on the grinder had been dropped on the floor 2 weeks earlier. That a coworker had picked it up, visually inspected it, seen nothing obvious, and put it back on the bench. That visual inspection is insufficient to detect internal microcracks in vitrified bonded abrasive discs, and that there is a specific technical procedure for that, required by 29 CFR 1910. 215D1, called the ring test. The ring test is simple. You suspend the disc by its center hole and lightly tap the edge with a non-metallic object. An intact disc produces a clear metallic tone. A disc with an internal crack produces a dull, flat sound. The difference is audible. The procedure takes less than 10 seconds. Not one worker in that shop had ever been trained to perform the ring test. The standard required it. The practice did not exist. And while Diego held the tool and pressed the disc against the metal piece, that invisible microcrack was spinning at more than 10,000 rotations per minute, waiting for the right combination of pressure and angle to propagate. What happened next was not inevitable. It was predictable. And that is exactly what makes this story more disturbing than any fatality report attributed to bad luck. What the disc did when that crack propagated will completely change the way you think about equipment inspection. That comes in the next part. The crack propagated in a fraction of a second. The disc did not explode dramatically, the way you might picture it from a movie scene. It fractured asymmetrically, the way all abrasive discs fracture when structural integrity collapses under high rotation. One larger piece and several smaller ones, each following its own trajectory at projectile speed, each carrying the kinetic energy of all that accumulated spin. The grinder guard was installed. That was what saved Diego's face. The fragments were deflected downward and to the side, not upward. Diego suffered a deep laceration to his left forearm and temporarily lost hearing in his right ear from the pressure wave of the burst. The injury required surgery and 36 days away from work. The OSHA investigation that followed revealed 5 distinct violations in that single operation. The first, the disc installed was a cutoff wheel, not a grinding disc. Both 29 CFR 1910, 215 and its construction equivalent, 29 CFR 1926, 303, are explicit in the requirement for compatibility between disc type and application. A cutoff wheel is designed to receive frontal stress, perpendicular to its face. It was not designed to withstand lateral pressure. When lateral pressure is applied, the abrasive receives stress it was never engineered for. Rupture becomes a matter of load and time. The second, the disc had not gone through the ring test before mounting, as required by 29 CFR 1910.
215D1.
There was no record of any formal disc inspection in the months leading up to the accident. The third, the operating speed of the grinder had not been checked against the maximum speed marked on the disc. The standard is clear. The disc's maximum rated RPM must equal or exceed the machine's operating RPM. When the machine runs faster than the disc was engineered to handle, the risk of rupture increases in a nonlinear fashion. A disc operating at 110% of its maximum rated speed does not present 110% of the normal risk. It presents a multiple of that risk. The fourth, Diego was not wearing a full face shield. He was wearing standard safety glasses. both 29 CFR 1910, 215 and ANSI Z 87. 1. The American standard for eye and face protection are clear about the requirement for full face protection in angle grinder operations where there is a risk of fragment projection. Safety glasses protect the eyes. They do not protect the face. They do not protect the neck. They are not substitutes for a face shield in high-risk abrasive operations. The fifth, and the most systemic of all, there was no verifiable record of formal training for Diego on the specific equipment he was operating that day, as required by OSHA's general training standards. The onboarding training had covered general safety. It had never specifically addressed in a verifiable way the operation of large-format angle grinders, the specific risks of kickback, disc selection and inspection procedures, or the requirements of 29 CFR 1910. 215. 18 years of experience. Zero documented, verifiable training on the equipment. The company was cited and fined. But here is the detail that most accident analyses overlook. Diego was not the first. In that same shop, over the 2 years prior, there were 3 documented near-miss incidents involving angle grinders that had never been formally investigated. One worker had seen a disc throw fragments. A co-worker had experienced a minor kickback that was never reported out of fear of affecting productivity. A situation where the guard had been temporarily removed and replaced without anyone raising a question. OSHA refers to near-miss records as the vital signs of a safety system. They are the industrial equivalent of an ECG showing an anomaly that the doctor sees and decides not to investigate. The problem had been announcing itself. The system was not equipped to listen. But there is a phenomenon that makes this pattern even more persistent, and it does not live on the shop floor. It lives in meeting rooms. In high-production environments, machine downtime has a real-time, calculable cost. Every minute with the line down is visible on the day's report. The cost of an accident, with lost time, investigation, OSHA fines, and insurance impact, is spread across months and shows up in different reports. The asymmetry is structural. The cost of unsafe practice is invisible until the moment it stops being invisible, and by that moment it is enormous. OSHA has a number for that. The National Safety Council calculated that the average cost of a serious workplace injury in the United States in 2023 was $43,000. For fatalities, the average climbs to $1,460,000 when direct and indirect costs are included. For every $100 invested in adequate training, occupational safety studies document an average return of 4 to 6 times that amount in reduced accident costs. Safety is not a cost. It is the investment with the best return that most companies fail to make. And until that equation is internalized in management decisions, workers like Diego continue to be sent to high-rotation tools without the knowledge that federal law has required since before many of them were born. What does any of this have to do with the disc Diego installed that morning? Everything. Because the wrong disc did not end up on that workbench by accident. It got there because the entire system of selection, inspection, and training had been failing silently, one small negligence at a time for years. But there is a third element in this story that almost nobody mentions in accident analyses. And it is the most disturbing of all. That comes in the next part. 3 months after Diego's accident, the same company underwent a voluntary safety audit conducted by an outside consultant. The consultant asked a simple question to 12 shop workers, all with more than 5 years of experience in the role. How do you select the correct disc for a grinding operation? Not one of the 12 mentioned RPM compatibility. 8 of the 12 could not explain the technical difference between a cutoff wheel and a grinding disc beyond visual appearance. 11 of the 12 had never heard the term ring test. All 12 stated that they visually inspected discs before use. But when asked what they were looking for in that inspection, their answers revealed they were searching only for obvious damage. Visible cracks. Large chips. Evident deformation. None of them knew that internal microcracks, the ones that cause catastrophic ruptures at high rotation, are invisible to the naked eye and detectable only through the ring test.
Walba experiència professionals.
12 identical knowledge gaps. And here is the central point that transforms that finding into something far more than an industrial statistic. Those gaps were not the workers' failure. They were the failure of the system that should have trained them. OSHA is unambiguous on that distinction. The responsibility for training belongs to the employer, not the worker. 29 CFR 1910. 215. combined with the general training requirements of 29 CFR 1910. 132 for personal protective equipment and the ANSI B7. 1 Standards for abrasive wheel safety, defines a complete framework of responsibility that begins with the employer and ends with the worker's verifiable competence. Verifiable competence. Not attendance. Not a signature. Competence. The actual ability to execute the correct procedure, on the actual equipment, under real conditions, without supervision. That is the definition OSHA uses. It is also the definition that most corporate training programs ignore entirely. There is a worker who needs to be mentioned here. His name was Raphael, and he worked at a structural steel fabrication shop in Ohio. Raphael had completed the company's safety training twice, once at hiring and once in the annual refresher cycle. He signed the attendance forms. He received the certificate. He understood the general safety concepts around angle grinders. But he had never been trained on the specific pre-use procedure for the exact model of angle grinder he operated every single day. That model had a particular characteristic. The disc locking nut, when installed in reverse, created an apparently firm grip that, under sustained vibration, would gradually release the disc. Raphael installed the nut in reverse, as he had done several times before, without consequences. As he had seen co-workers do. As the absence of consequences had validated, in his brain's judgment, as the correct method. 40 minutes into the shift, the disc came loose. The guard deflected the disc downward. Raphael suffered a fractured right foot and a laceration to the knee. The disc traveled more than 13 feet before stopping. The investigation found that the mounting instructions for that specific angle grinder model were in the equipment manual. In English. Raphael read only Spanish. The document existed. The comprehension did not. OSHA requires that training materials and safety information be presented in a language the worker understands. The standard is clear. The company had not complied. Raphael was the 4th worker at that shop to be injured with angle grinders over the prior 2 years. The previous 3 incidents had been recorded as minor injuries and filed away. None of them had triggered a systemic review of training procedures. The pattern was there, documented, waiting to be read. Nobody had read it. That has a name in safety systems analysis: normalization of deviance. It is when inadequate practices are performed repeatedly without immediate visible consequences, and the system absorbs them as normal. The worker who operated without a ring test 20 times and came away unharmed learns, involuntarily, that the ring test is optional. The supervisor who approved operations with the wrong disc 10 times without consequences learns that the distinction between cutoff and grinding discs is a technical detail with no practical impact. Until the day the physics decides it is time to disagree. There is one statistic that encapsulates all of this with a disturbing precision. Occupational accident studies consistently estimate that between 80 and 90% of serious accidents in industrial environments are caused by human error that could have been prevented with adequate training. 80 to 90%. That is not fatalism about human capacity. It is a statement about the power of the right training. And here is the question that no safety manager should be able to answer with uncertainty. If an OSHA inspector walked into your operation right now and asked any worker to demonstrate the complete pre-use procedure for an angle grinder, what would you see? Ring test on the new disc before mounting. Verification of RPM compatibility between disc and machine. Visual inspection for cracks, chips, and moisture damage. Confirmation of guard integrity and alignment with the disc. Verification of the auxiliary handle installed on the correct side for the operation type. PPE check. Full face shield meeting ANSI Z87. 1. Hearing protection for exposure above 85 dBA per 29 CFR 1910. 95. Fitted gloves, and respiratory protection when the material being cut generates dust, particularly silica, where 29 CFR 1926. 1153 imposes an exposure limit of 50 micrograms per cubic meter across an 8-hour shift. That is the checklist OSHA would expect to see executed. How many workers in your operation could run through that checklist from memory, on the actual equipment, without consulting any document? If the answer is anything less than every single person who operates that tool, the gap exists. And gaps, with angle grinders, have a documented history of closing in ways nobody would choose. What happens when a company decides to fill that gap for real, not on paper but in the actual practice of the shop floor? That comes in the final part. And the numbers will surprise you. There is a metal fabrication company in the state of Michigan that, for 5 consecutive years, operated with 0 recordable accidents involving angle grinders. For an operation with more than 240 workers using the tool daily on 8-hour shifts, that number is not statistical luck. It is the result of a decision that was made after a serious accident and permanently changed how the company understands what training means. The accident that forced that change happened in 2017. A worker with 11 years of experience was operating a 7-inch angle grinder on a grinding task when he experienced a severe kickback. The disc struck his forearm. The injury required a skin graft and 6 months of rehabilitation. The internal investigation revealed the same pattern that appears in virtually every documented grinder accident: wrong disc for the operation, no ring test, guard installed but poorly adjusted, and a training program that existed on paper but had never built verifiable competence in any of the workers. The safety director who took over after that accident had a phrase he used in every team meeting: asterisk training that doesn't create different behavior isn't training. It's documentation. He rebuilt the entire program on a single premise drawn directly from OSHA's requirements. The worker must be able to demonstrate the correct procedure, without assistance, on the actual equipment he operates, before being cleared to work independently. Any equipment change, any new angle grinder model, any change in the types of discs used, triggered a new cycle of hands-on training for the affected workers.
No PowerPoint presentations.
No onboarding video. A certified safety professional standing next to the worker, equipment running, procedure executed in the correct sequence, observed and evaluated. The first change the new program introduced was mandatory ring testing before every disc mounting, as required by 29 CFR 1910.
215 D1.
Within 3 months, the practice had been absorbed as a professional reflex by most workers. Within 6 months, it was part of shift culture. Senior workers had started holding newer workers accountable for it, with no management intervention required. The second change was the creation of a laminated disc selection reference chart, fixed to every workbench, that cross-referenced operation type, material being worked, available grinder model, and compatible disc, with the disc's maximum rated speed highlighted in red next to each tool's operating RPM. The standard 29 CFR 1910. 215 requires speed compatibility. The chart made it impossible to skip that verification without a deliberate effort. The third change was the creation of an open near-miss log, where any worker could report a close call anonymously, without fear of consequence, with a guaranteed response. The situation would be investigated and the findings shared with the entire team within 5 business days. Over 2 years, reported near-misses increased from 2 per year to 27 per year. That may sound like a bad result. It is not. More near-misses reported means the early detection system is working. It means workers trust the process enough to report. And every reported near-miss is an opportunity to close a gap before it becomes an injury. The results across 5 years were documented and presented to OSHA as a case study. Recordable accident rate involving angle grinders reduced to 0. Costs related to abrasive tool injuries cut by 92% compared to the period before the program. Average unplanned equipment downtime dropped 38%, because equipment inspected and operated by well-trained workers fails less. And the company went from 3 OSHA citations in the 2 years before the program to 0 citations in the 5 years that followed. 0 citations in 5 years. Not by luck. By decision. There is a worker at that Michigan company, an operator named Fabricio, who in October of 2022 was beginning a cutting operation when, during the ring test, he heard a different sound from the disc that had been mounted by another worker on the previous shift. A dull, flat tone, not the clean metallic ring of an intact disc. He removed the disc, called the supervisor, and the disc was sent for analysis. The analysis confirmed an internal micro crack that was not visible to the naked eye. That disc, spinning at over 12,000 RPM under the pressure of a structural steel cut, would have fragmented. Fabricio knew what to listen for because someone had invested real time in teaching him. Because the training had transformed a technical procedure into a professional instinct. Because the company had decided that verifiable competence was non-negotiable, even when the shift was running late, even when the line needed the part, even when the procedure took a few minutes that felt like they did not exist. Those minutes always exist. What does not exist is the willingness to prioritize them. And that is the message OSHA has been trying to deliver through every standard, every audit, every formal citation, for more than 50 years, angle grinder accidents are not inevitable. They are predictable. They are traceable to specific, documented causes that have specific, documented solutions. The gap between Diego's accident and Fabrizio's safe shift is not one of technology, not of equipment, not of budget. It is one of decision. The decision to train for real. The decision to verify competence, not just attendance. The decision to treat near misses with the same rigor as actual accidents. The decision to update training every time the equipment changes, every time the procedure changes, every time a new worker arrives without verified experience. OSHA provides resources for this. The OSHA Outreach Training Program has trained more than 5.8 million workers over the past 5 years. Wherever the reach of that training has increased, the rate of serious accidents has fallen in direct proportion. The causality is direct and documented. Diego spent 36 days away from work. He went back to the same shop, the same job, the same tool. But he came back different. Not because the accident had made him more careful, although it had, but because during the investigation and rehabilitation process, someone had finally sat down with him, looked him in the eye, and explained what 29 CFR 1910. 215 required. Explained what the ring test was, how to perform it, what to listen for, what the wrong sound means. Explained the real difference between a cutoff wheel and a grinding disc in terms of abrasive structure and stress tolerance. Explained that the guard is not optional and that its adjustment angle determines where the fragments will go if the disc ruptures. 18 years of experience. And it took an accident for someone to explain the basics. When asked what he would say to managers who still see safety training as a dispensable cost during periods of production pressure, Diego went quiet for a few seconds. Tell them to calculate the cost of my time off. Then calculate the cost of training me right before it happened. Then tell me which one was cheaper. The answer is in the numbers OSHA publishes. It always has been. The tool sitting on your workbench right now is not the villain. It is exactly what it was designed to be. Efficient, powerful, precise, and completely intolerant of any gap between what the operator knows and what the operator needs to know. Closing that gap is not bureaucracy. It is not regulatory overreach. It is the only investment that separates a routine shift from a phone call nobody wants to make home at 3 in the afternoon. If you manage a team, the question that needs to be answered today is not whether you have training documentation on file. It is whether you are certain that every single worker who operates the tool can execute the correct procedure, alone, without supervision, with any disc, on any piece of equipment in your operation. If the answer is anything less than an absolute yes, the gap exists. And gaps, with angle grinders, do not wait. Share this script with whoever makes training decisions in your operation. If you have ever experienced or witnessed an angle grinder accident, tell us in the comments. Your experience can close someone else's gap before an accident has to. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. And ask yourself, when was the last time anyone actually verified that your team knows how to perform the ring test? The tool nobody respects, until the day it decides to teach you.